Namaste and welcome to the Festival of Bharat. My name is Kamal Madishetty and you're tuned into Season 4 of the Festival of Bharat. We are a platform that believes in having open and frank conversations about Bharat with no holds barred. And today we have a very special guest with us, Abhinav Prakash ji. Abhinav ji is an assistant professor at SRCC Delhi University. He's a well-known columnist on various socio-political and economic issues. Namaste Abhinav ji and welcome to the Festival of Bharat.
Namaste, Kamal, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Abhinavji. Abhinavji, I want to begin by asking you about probably the most burning policy question in front of the country right now, and that is the farm reform bills. And there is so much we could discuss there, including both the politics and economics of it. But I want to begin by asking you about the origin of things like the APMCs, the Essential Commodities Act, etc. How did all of these different frameworks and structures come into being, and why do we need to reform them?
Yeah, but that's a very interesting question, Kamal. See, if you want to understand what is happening, we have to first understand that what has been the food policy of India. So, after independence, the objectives of Indian food policy was basically to ensure, first of all, the food security. Because remember, after 200 years of the British rule, India's food security was completely destroyed. One way to look at the British rule or the colonial rule is that there were 200 years of famine and hunger and mass starvation. So our first priority was to build food security so that we have enough food grains available in India that we do not have famines. Second was to ensure that the farmers get enough income from their farming activities because that was the core of the India's economy at that time, and we really wanted our farmers to have high income because so they can drive up the Indian economic growth rate. And the third was that people or the masses get access to the food grains at a cheaper rate. Now, these three objectives are very good in themselves, but there's a problem. The problem is that we cannot achieve all three of them simultaneously. Think of it in this way. If we are increasing the higher food grains production, if the supply is increasing in the economy, the prices is definitely going to fall. When the prices of the food grains is falling, then the incomes of the farmers will get affected. They will also decline. And if in order to ensure that the farmers' income remain higher, we artificially increase the prices, the consumers will get hurt via higher inflation. Now, and this is the problem we have been trying to solve, and we have never been able to solve because all these three objectives are contradictory to each other in the sense that they're not negatively contradictory, but they're impossible to achieve simultaneously. So, what we did in the 1960s, basically, when we had two wars, we had two major famines in India, it became very clear that we have to do something about the food security in India because the 5-year plans had failed. It was clear by that time that they are not working, and we have made an error by going the way of this Nehru and Mahalanobis heavy industrialization policy. So under Lal Bahadur Shastri, a program was initiated, which is now known as the Green Revolution. And the pillar of the Green Revolution was very simple, that we're going to focus on certain areas, that is Punjab and Haryana, because they're closer to Delhi. And also historically, in the last century, they had built extensive networks of irrigation canal. So they were quite fertile. And the agriculture was well developed as compared to the eastern part of India. So we focused there. We told them, that we are going to give you easy access to credit. We are going to give you easy access to water, electricity. And not only that, we are going to guarantee you that the state is going to buy whatever you produce at a minimum price, so that a minimum support price, not the minimum price, because that's a floor price. So we told them that you focus on wheat and rice. This is what we need for the public distribution system. So you grow wheat and rice. We are going to ensure that all of that is bought at a good enough price, which is now known as minimum support price, and that will be procured by the state under the Sarkari Mandis, which is what you call APMCs today. So this was the entire system. The root or the origin of APMC basically goes back to the 19th century under the British rule, when they wanted to extract resources from Indian agriculture for the British industry. So they set up these government or the Sarkari marketing committees in the central India, in the region of Berar, and the cotton farmers were forced to sell all their cottons into these mandis to the government appointed agents. So that is the origin. But of course, the APMC system we have today is different from what it was then. But that is the origin. That this is what lies. You want to channelize the resources from the agriculture for a specific purpose. Under PDS, APMC were also doing the same. We're channelizing the wheat and rice into PDS system through the APMC. The origin of price control is much more sinister. So we all know Alauddin Khilji. And Alauddin Khilji basically instituted the policy of price control over the food grains because he wanted to make sure that the Turkish settlers in India, so by that time, Turkish invasion had happened in India, and you had these garrison towns being established throughout the northern India because the Delhi Sultanate or the Sultanate period was simply the military occupation of the northern India. So he wanted to make sure that the urban population, because Hindus, most of the Hindus were displaced, old towns were destroyed, new garrison towns were being established, and they get access to cheap grain because the nature of the Delhi Sultanate was it was a Turkish state, right? That it was a racist state. So they wanted to make sure that the food grain and the other daily commodities are available to the urban population and the army at a cheap price. So he instituted this very brutal price control, which basically destroyed the peasantry, which was mostly Hindu. And that there was also a political motive that you destroy the native population so that they cannot rebel and they cannot pose resistance to you. And since then, this kind of price control in one form or the other has continued. So Alauddin Khilji was an extreme case, right? But this price control did continue, this idea did continue. And but the root of the modern price control, which is what you call the Essential Commodities Act, goes to the World War. So in the World War II, basically there was a shortage of food grain and also of the other essential commodities. So British government came up with this law that we have to regulate the prices of these commodities, and so that the evil Hindu businessman do not hoard the food grains or so. So and even after independence, we continued with that because remember after independence also our condition was really bad in the terms of food security. There's huge scarcity. India has come out of a bloody partition. We had lost a major portion of our fertile agricultural land to Pakistan, which is the western Punjab. So we did not want to take any chances, so we had that price control. But the problem is that both the APMC and the Essential Commodities Act, they have their origin in something negative. And something which has its origin in negative cannot work or cannot give you positive result, even though you repackage it and restructure it. So this is what we have been doing since the 1960s. And the result was, in short term, it was good because the food grains production actually boomed because farmers were incentivized and they were producing wheat and grain. But in the long term, what has happened is very devastating. Number one, MSP is artificially high price. So you are basically distorting the market prices. And remember, the prices in the economy are signals. This signal resource allocation. So if you distort the prices, you are distorting the resource allocation, which will have second order effect, third order effect on the economy, which might be very negative. And this is what has happened in Punjab and Haryana, that the cropping pattern has completely changed. The biodiversity of Punjab has been destroyed because everyone is growing wheat and rice because there is an artificially high MSP on that. And Punjab and this part of the India is basically water scarce region. People don't realize it. It's an arid region, and it's not meant for rice cultivation. But the Punjab farmers are growing basmati rice as well, which is very water intensive crop. So what is happening in Punjab that the water tables have been destroyed, fertility is declining. In fact, the condition is so bad that within next 20, 30 years, Punjab might be facing widespread drought. It might be a very disastrous situation for the entire northwestern India. And the fertility is declining. But in order to keep on increasing the production, because you have a perverse incentive in the form of the MSP, the Punjabi farmers are using lots of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and so on, to the extent that Punjab today is the cancer belt of India. Right, the highest per capita cases of cancer are in Punjab. So this second order effect, third order effect of MSP is quite devastating. So we really need to move away from the MSP as such. APMCs. What have the APMCs done? So when they were brought in, I mean, they were brought in to ensure that there's a more systematic procurement of the food grains from the Punjab and the Haryana farmers to feed the PDS system, public distribution system, so that we can distribute cheap food grains to our poorer population in the rest of the country. But the over the time, the rich farmers, because green revolution basically changed the farming community itself. You have the rise of the capitalist farmers. Capitalist farmers are the one who owns the means of production, who are employing wage labor as opposed to the traditional labor, and who are basically working for the profit motive. Some of these farmers became very rich, right? And given the social dynamics on the ground, they came to dominate these APMCs. So APMCs became state-sponsored monopoly of certain private capitalist farmers. And what we don't understand is that there's a big, they are also the politicians on the countryside, they're also the businessmen, and they're also the large farmers. And there's something else which people don't understand, the interlinkages in the agrarian relations. So what will happen that these big farmers are also jamindars, they're also traders, and they're also money lenders. So they will advance loans to the other farmers, other small farmers, or the tenants on their land, and the interest rate charged will be very high, and in return, those farmers will have to come to the APMC, sell the food crops to these farmers alone. They have no freedom. So this was kind of a same system of ushery coming back in the system, ironically sponsored by the state sponsored monopoly. So now when the government is trying to move away from it, in the sense they're not abolishing APMCs or the MSP, they're simply saying, well, we allow the farmers to go anywhere, and we also allow the private sector to come and buy from them directly. No need to come to the APMC. If they want to buy it from their farms itself, good enough. And these vested interests who have been benefiting from this system so far, and who also control the unions because they control the local politics, so they are up in arms against this thing. And that is why you see they're not willing to debate the farm laws. They're not going to go clause by clause. They're not interested even in the Supreme Court appointed committee. They just want a repeal of the law because it has nothing to do with the provisions of the laws themselves, which are in fact very good. It has to do with the wider political economy, as they feel threatened that their social and economic and political position might decline in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Abhinavji. I think that was a very comprehensive account, both how these things evolved and also where we are, where we stand today. I think, like on the point that about Punjab actually suffering from so many cancer patients, there I believe there's also a train which is called Cancer Express or something like that. Um,
Yes,
so
it goes from Bhatinda to some place. I
yes,
don't.
yeah. Abhinavji, I think the economic logic of the reforms in the agriculture sector is actually so sound at the end of the day. But what we see in the politics of it is it's completely opposite. For example, I mean, various political parties had in some form or the other, they had supported this previously. They had these things in their manifestos. Yet, what we are seeing now is that they have gone back on their own sort of positions on this. So, I just want to understand what explains, this kind of hypocrisy.
Well, I think that is the nature of Indian politics. So when any party is in opposition, they oppose the same thing, and when they're in power, they do the same thing. So that's simple, opportunistic politics. But there are two more factors involved here. Number one is that the opposition parties in India have realized that they are unable to fight the Modi-led BJP in a direct political contest because somehow the Modi-led BJP is outsmarting them on every political issue, and they're unable to defeat the BJP in the election in a comprehensive manner. So there are victories here and there in certain states, but they are unable to roll back the march of the BJP. So what they're trying to do is that they're trying to piggy ride on the, let's say, the farmers' protest or the students' protest or different kinds of protests, giving them a more radical edge, pushing them towards the more extreme position, in the hope that these protests will tire the BJP down. So You want to drag the government down into those street fights so that in the long run, the government gets delegitimized and they can have a political comeback. Other point is, you have this infiltration of certain radical elements as well. There's no running away from that. So after the Chitambram started the Operation Green Hunt, hunting down the Maoists and the Naxals, the Naxals changed their strategy. So old Naxal strategy was that you surround the cities, you control the countryside, you surround the cities, and the cities would fall, the old Maoist strategy. But they have realized that that is not working. It has been so many decades, they have been waging war against India since independence, and they have not succeeded. So they changed their strategy in the last decade, and an important component of the strategy was that you now have to expand in the urban areas, right? So you have to have your networks in the urban areas which can channelize the discontent, the common discontent, because there will be always some or the other issues. So there will be always some kind of issues of students, sometimes the issues of Dalits, sometimes the issues of some other community, let's say the Muslims or so on. So their idea is to build up organizational structure in the urban centers so that when these issues come up or they themselves create these issues, so you can push it to the extreme and you drag the state into the street fight. So we have seen this repeatedly. We have seen this in the case of JNU. We have seen this thing in the case of Shaheen Bagh, all these anti-CA protests. Jamia, they started with the right from the Jamia, ended with the Delhi right. And then we are seeing that in the farmers' protest. The idea is very simple. You drag the state down repeatedly into street battles so the state gets delegitimized. And then you can go for the kill. So this is, I'm not saying that these protests are the Naxal protests, don't get me wrong. I'm saying they're also infiltrating, right? They're also, and they infiltrate and then they push for the extreme maximalist position. So given left on their own, these protests will come to some negotiated agreement with the government. But once you have radical elements infiltrating, they will make sure that the agreement becomes more and more elusive. And the third point is also very important, Kamal, is that the distribution of the political power in India favors the villages. So the distribution of the seats in the parliament and the legislature is much higher in the villages than that is warranted by the demographics. And why is that happening? Because our census data are all wrong, right? So the way they define the urban and rural areas is not really a good parameter anymore. So what we are doing is that we are underestimating the urban population, we are overestimating the rural population. Many studies show that the urban population might be as high as 60%, right? So because our data is not capturing the massive rural urban migration, there are classification errors. So you go in Delhi, you have lived in Delhi, Kamal, so you have this Bear Sarai, Katwadia Sarai, and whatnot Sarai, which are classified not as urban areas or semi-urban areas, which is a fraud because they're in the middle of the cities. They're as urban as the colony next door. So once you take away those classification errors, and you also account for massive migration, so you have people, let's say, living in next to Delhi, let's say Hapur, right? So they have their permanent address in Hapur, but 5 days of a week they're living in Delhi. So basically, the urban population is much higher. At the weekend, they will go back to their home with their family or something. So that is not being captured. So urban demographics is much larger than the rural demographics in India, but the distribution of seat is the opposite, right? So, and that also gives this incentive that you have to win the countryside if you want to win the elections. And once you have that, who is the dominant section in the villages? Is the farmers. Okay? Now remember, the farmers are only 8 to 10% of India's population. And out of that, 80 to 86% farmers are small and marginal farmers. So basically, who is left? The big farmers, the rich farmers, the jamindars. Or in the case of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, the new farmers which emerged after 70s, the capitalist farmers. So if you want to win elections, you have to go to them, you have to have their support. So you will do everything they will ask, right? This is how the politics is run. Political parties respond to what the voters demand. So these farmers want free electricity, free Bijli Pani, MSP, APMC, fertilizer subsidy, whatnot. And the political parties will give them.
Right.
But this is a reason why we are seeing this kind of, the political support for this kind of irrational, I would say, protests.
Very insightful, Abhinavji. I think there are many layers to even the political landscape and how this is actually operating in the political landscape of the country. And I think your point about the urban demographics actually being mismatched. I mean, it also has so many other kinds of problems. Probably something we could discuss some other time, which is like undermining urban governance, and very little attention is paid to urban issues because of that. Um, so I want to actually come back to one of the things you mentioned, and that is the idea of a capitalist farmer. When we look at the protests, and if we look at just the geographic sort of limit of the protest, it's mostly in Punjab. Most of the farmers in other parts of the country, they have actually welcomed this. They've supported it. In fact, you have tweeted about this. The number of farmers unions which actually are in favor of this is far higher than the ones who are opposed to it. So I want to focus on those specific farmers who are farmers and a combination of so many other people who are trying to oppose this. What is the kind of benefits, and you've alluded to that. I wanted to speak on that. What is the kind of benefits that they have got from the state? How have they sort of benefited from that?
Well, as I told you in the beginning, so when the Green Revolution started, it was all state-sponsored capitalism. So free, electricity, free water, subsidized credit, and assured purchase of the crops at the guaranteed price. And that has basically, and FCI procurement. So the government has been procuring from those reasons heavily because you have to procure somewhere, and those were the areas which were the focus of the Green Revolution. So their prosperity depends to a great extent to this the existence and the continuation of the present system, and this is what has been happening. So these farmers who are protesting, they're simply scared. A lot of them are really scared. So the union leaders which have some other agenda, but the masses, they are scared about the future because they somehow think, if this system goes, what new system will come, and which is a legitimate concern. That's not something we can say, well, you are being paranoid, because they say, well, we don't know any other system, we don't know any other lifestyle. For decades this has been continuing, and there's lots of misinformation and propaganda as well, Kamal, that your lands will be taken away, and you will not get prices for your crops and so on. So they are protesting because they are scared, and also because they're so used to the present system of state patronage and the state support, they really don't want to jump into a new word, the brave new word. So they're not ready for that. I think that is at the root of this mass participation in the protest. But the people who are going to benefit if the farm laws are repealed are the same old small section of the rich farmers and the unions, right? So it's not even in the benefit of the majority of the farmers of the Punjab. So what should the government be doing, in my opinion, is to move away from the MSP in the long run. So you cannot repeal MSP as of now, but you should be able to explain to the farmers that, look, we cannot continue with this MSP. We cannot continue with giving distorted prices on certain crops, which is having so many negative impacts now. We want to replace that with a direct income support, right? So we have PM Kisan Yojana, an excellent Yojana started by the Prime Minister Modi. So you can expand it. It's currently 6,000 per year. Perhaps slowly you can expand it to 16,000, 26,000, depending upon what is the capacity of the state, so that you are able to maintain the incomes of the farmer, at the same time taking away this distorted price support and subsidies to the farmers. So I think that is a political process that will take long time, and that will require immense effort on the ground to convince the farmers and also to counter the propaganda and the misinformation.
Right. Very interesting, Abhinavji. I think when we look at also some of the other issues around these farm, I mean, bills, and as well as the protests around it, one issue or one perspective that is sort of missing from the public discourse is the Dalit perspective about these farm bills. So I actually wanted to understand from you, what does it mean for Dalits when you look at the political economy of these issues? What is the Dalit perspective on these issue?
Well, I would say, it's far better for the Dalits to work in the factories of Ambani and Adani than to work on the fields of Kisans. I mean, there is no, it's a no-brainer because if you go to the countryside, as I told you, the farmers are not the majority population of the country. They're not even the majority population of the villages. So, non-Kisans form the majority population of the villages. And a large number of them are landless laborers who are mostly from the Dalit caste. So they come from all the caste. There will be even some forward caste people who are also landless laborers, but mostly the landless laborers are the Dalits because they hardly own any land. And of course, there are lots of regional variation as well. So we cannot generalize for the whole country, but this is a pattern we see. And these farmers and these landless laborers have are exploited like anything. I mean, there is economic exploitation, there is social oppression, and there is political marginalization. The condition is not really good. I mean, it's a very bad condition of the Dalits in the countryside. You look at Punjab, Dalits are 30 to 32% population of the Punjab, which is the highest in the country. I mean, UP has only around 20%, and they form a government in UP. You have 32% population; they are nowhere to be seen in the political power. The reason is that in an agrarian state like Punjab, where the politics revolves around the agriculture and agriculture sector is very powerful, the Dalits hardly own 2 to 3% of the agricultural land. That is the extent of exclusion, let's say, from the mainstream. So they really don't have much stake in this system, right? Continuation system. And also, once you are giving higher MSP to the kisans, that might benefit some of the major bigger kisans, but that will cause higher inflation, and that is going to hurt these landless laborers because they have to go and buy the food grains. If MSP artificially high price is causing higher inflation, the majority of the rural population also stands to lose. Right? So for just for benefiting certain kisans in the villages, you are harming the majority of the rural population. Not saying that the urban population also is getting harmed. So and that is why Dalits do not really have much stake. They will rather work in the factories. They will rather be the slave of the Ambani than the slave of the Kisans. I mean, not that being slave is a good thing, but it's a better off situation because Ambani is not. See, Ambani does not go and kick the Dalits. Ambani does not go and beat the Dalits for drinking water from the well. Ambani never stopped the barats of a Dalit that you can't ride on the horse or you can't do this thing. Ambani is not abusing Dalits on the basis of caste. Ambani is not practicing untouchability and exclusion, right? Unlike Kisan. So I think it's not even a brainer. I think for Dalits it's better to move away from the agriculture sector. It's better for them to leave the villages and move to the cities and the industrial sectors.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective, Abhinavji. I think it's much needed, and I see it's completely missing in the public discourse. Um, if I could actually stay on that point, and probably look at the bigger picture, which is Dalits and Hindutva politics. You've spoken about this before, but I wanted to actually understand from you when you look at Dalits in the larger sort of framework of Hindutva politics. How is that relationship? Can you tell us about that, especially in terms of industrialization, in terms of mobility, in terms of various sort of aspects of life, social life, economic life? Could you throw some light on that?
But see, what is Hindutva? Hindutva is basically an ideology which emerged in the last century, basically trying to answer the challenge thrown by the colonialism that is India a nation and our Hindus are a group of people, right? So they basically questioned your fundamental existence because they're looking from the Eurocentric lens and saying that is India even a nation? What kind of nation you are? You a Tamil, Gujarati, or are you a Dalit, or you are a Brahmin, or you are a Jat, or you're a Gujar? What exactly you people are? And second, they question what is Hindu? Are you people are even a religious community or not? So Hindutva emerged as a counter to that, is basically arguing that, well, these people are one. India is a one nation. And it was Hindutva at its core is an anti imperialist ideology, right? It is answering the Western imperialism. It is countering the resurgent Islamic imperialism as well. So Hindutva is, many people say that, well, Hindutva is politics. Hindutva is not Hinduism. I say Hindutva is the political response of the Hindu society to the political Islam and the Western imperialism. And Hindutva seeks to transcend the divisions of caste, language, and also culture, and also other kinds of barriers and differences which Indians have. So, in that sense, Hindutva seeks to unite the people as a community. It's not a homogenizing force, right? So, if you look at the Hindutva, it's not saying that the local variations or diversity has to go. That was a phase. I mean, that was a phase in 30s and 40s when even Congress was saying that we have to become one, we have to have one national dress, one national this thing. The communists were also trying to homogenize people. So that was the trend of the time, that homogenization. But Hindutva has outgrown that long back. Hindutva no longer says Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan or something. They're very comfortable with the diversity. In fact, they see themselves as the defender of the diversity now. So when it comes to Dalits, that has been a bigger challenge. So Hindutva seeks to include them into the Dalit fold, and this is why you see Hindutva faced tremendous resistance from the social orthodoxy in the beginning. Savarkar was boycotted, right, by his own community. Many of the Hindutva leaders, many of the Hindutva people did not get success because they could not find an audience in the villages which agreed to their view of the Hindu unity, that you stop differentiating, you stop discriminating, and so on. What has happened is, in the last few decades, especially after economic reforms, you have this rise of the urban centers. You have the rise of urbanization. And once you have industrialization, once you have urbanization, what's happened that the people are now getting uprooted from their villages and their local communities. Now they have to come and live in the urban center, work in a workplace, maybe industry or a factory together. They're basically being forced to live together, right? So when they were back in their villages, they were living at different tolas, doing different jobs, practicing untouchability and whatnot. But when you are in the urban center, you have no option but to live together, right? So of course there are differences, discrimination even in the urban centers. But over the time, what happens? A common culture starts evolving. So what is happening in India over the last couple of decades is that you have the rise of a new class of Hindu castes. So people of different castes are coming, living together in colonies, in cities, and so on, and they're slowly evolving a certain commonality, right? And that is giving rise to this common religious identity as well, because once you are uprooted from your village, from let's say from UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, you are thrown into Delhi. What is the common link which unites you? Not your local culture, not your caste. It's just the religion, right? It's just the Durga Puja. It's just the some Chhat festival. So Chhat festival is a Bihari festival, but you see in Delhi, everyone is now celebrating it slowly, right? Even the people who are not from Bihar, they also participate. But that is the emergence of a common Hindu culture, and that becomes, the rise of the Hindu consciousness, and that becomes the rise of the Hindutva consciousness, right? So this is the process we are seeing. The rise of urbanization, industrialization, and Hindutva is going hand in hand. That is natural because Hindutva argues for a nation, and nation is the byproduct of urbanization and industrialization. Because what is nation? Nation is simply, I would say, a body of people which has similar expectations, similar aspirations, similar culture, and also similar memories, right? So, and that can only happen in the urban center when people intermingle with each other. So, in a sense, the Dalits are also part of this process because this process is reshaping the entire Hindu society. So, Dalits are also part of it. Also, the other part is that, I mean, you have in the countryside, especially North India, lots of these communal tensions. And most of these communal tensions are between the Muslims and the Dalits at the grassroots level or the ABC caste. And because of the nature of the secular politics in India, those Dalits or those extremely backward caste are simply left on their own in case of a communal clash. There's no justice for them because political parties, especially secular parties, have been rushing to side with the Muslims only, irrespective of who is right or wrong, right? And that also basically pushes the Dalits towards the Hindutva as the only force which stands by them when they are in trouble in a communal clash. So I think these two processes are going together. Also, there is, rising, I would say, I- kind of a revival of Hinduism in India, right? So, Hinduism is really getting stronger, irrespective of what the people say. Uh, Sanskritization is the most strongest force sweeping the countryside over the last few decades. Now, Sanskritization is always seen in academic discourse as a negative thing, but it's not necessarily a negative thing, right? So, if it's like incorporating more and more people into the social mainstream, I mean, that is good enough. I mean, if you are completely excluded from the society, you become Sanskritized, you're part of the mainstream society, even though there are inequalities still, but that's a better situation than before. And that Sanskritization, that Hinduization process is also playing its role, basically expanding the Hindutva constituency among the peripheral groups like Dalits.
Thank you so much, Abhinav ji. And I think one of the things that we can remember is definitely that Babasaheb Ambedkar actually advocated for Sanskrit to be a national language, and that also tells us something. But yeah, as you said, it is. I mean, all of these processes I think are so important for. I mean, if you're talking about a civilizational resurgence, because as you said, like cities are going to be at the center of it, right?
Civilization is about cities. By definition itself, villages do not form civilization.
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you for those insights. Abhinavji, there's also one other thing. I'm going back to the farm protests and the politics and the political economy around it, and that is the intervention that we've seen just now, which is of the judiciary. Now, and this is not something that is has been done in isolation. We have seen time and time again in many examples where the judiciary really has overstepped. And so I wanted to understand from you, do you think this is kind of an example of judicial overreach, and or more generally, what is this problem of judicial overreach that we are seeing in recent times?
Well, what has judiciary done in the case of farms laws? It has basically put them on hold. I think this is not simply the case of judicial overreach. I think that it's undermining of democracy itself, right? So maybe they are not seeing it this way, but this is how I'm seeing it. In the long run, this will undermine the democracy itself, because what you have done, you have just legitimized the street veto on the parliament, right? So India is a parliamentary democracy. Laws are not made by the people. Laws are made by the parliamentarians. Right? Democracy in India is not the rule of the people, in the sense that we do not have a direct democracy. A direct democracy will become a mobocracy. So that is why you have a mediated democracy, that you, in elections, you elect your representatives, they sit in the parliament, and then they make law, and it is their power alone. It's not the power of the people on the street to make the laws. And what we're seeing of late, since the last year at least, since the NTCA protest, there's an attempt to subvert the parliamentary democracy by saying that what the parliament is doing is unacceptable, and we on the street, we demand what should be done and what cannot be done. Now that's a very dangerous path, because once that happens, tomorrow, what if 100,000 people sit in Delhi outside Supreme Court saying that implement caste reservation in Supreme Court, and that's a demand. That's a long-standing demand of the OBC groups and the Dalits groups, that you implement reservations in the higher judiciary, because higher judiciary is so unrepresentative, right? Uh, what will Supreme Court do then? I mean, they in the 70s they came up with this doctrine of basic structure of the Constitution. It seems now that they have come up with a new doctrine of herd sentiments, right? That, oh, the farmers are hurt, they are not happy with the law, so we are going to put the law on hold. I'm simply pointing out the wider dynamics, which perhaps the judiciary is not thinking through, or maybe it is, I don't know. Uh, Other thing is that this judicial intervention is problematic, because it's not the job of the Supreme Court to make laws. It should only give judgment on the fact that whether the law is constitutional or not, or was due process followed or not. But what we are seeing is that through the PIL routes or through the judicial activism, the judiciary is increasingly encroaching upon the functions of executive and the parliament. Now, some people say, well, the parliament is not doing its work, so judiciary has to do its work. But I say there are tens of millions of cases pending in judiciary. Should parliament take over that job? I mean, that would be unacceptable. That would be a constitutional crisis. But see, judiciary in India is, I think, problematic in my opinion, because you have a judiciary which appoints its own members, which fixes the terms of services by itself, which also fixes salaries and everything by itself, which cannot be questioned because there's a contempt of court, you know, which and judges are appointed by itself. I mean, where do you see that in the world? I don't see that in America or in any mature democracy. In America, the judges don't appoint judges. Is the they're nominated by the president, if I'm not wrong, and then there's a confirmation hearing in the Parliament of America. So I think the judiciary in India is very opaque, is unrepresentative, and it lacks democratic popular mandate to do the kind of things it is doing. So judiciary wants to do these things. I say, let us have direct elections to the judiciary. Let judges be elected by direct election, and then they can make laws. I don't mind it. You should have a democratic mandate, because if you don't have it, what is happening? The judiciary is exposing itself to the public too much by interfering into these things. So they did something in the reservation rosters last year. They did something with the Jallikattu, last a few years back. They did something with the Diwali, the ban the crackers and all those things. Yeah, you are exposing yourself to the public, and then you have to. And if you're getting into the matter of public policy, then you also have to bear the repercussions. There will be backlash against you, and we're seeing that is happening in India. The public, which never spoke against the judiciary a few years back, is now increasingly mocking judiciary, increasingly defying judiciary, increasingly, abusing judiciary. That is not good for judiciary itself. Because, if you are exposing to yourself too much to the public, then, my goodness, one day you have to face the public anger, just like politicians face the public anger. But you are not a politician, you are judges. So judiciary is, on a very dangerous trajectory, in my opinion. And something has to be done, because we don't want that kind of anarchy in this country.
Absolutely, Abhinavji. I think there is much room for introspection on various fronts, as you said, not just in terms of also improving the efficiency, because there's so much of pending cases, but also just in terms of the turf and the territory that we are seeing judicial interventions in. Thank you for sharing that. Abhinavji, it has been a very insightful talk with you, and I'm so grateful that we've had you today to discuss a lot of issues, and I'm sure our audience has so many insights and to take home and think about. So thank you so much for sharing all that.
Thank you, Kamal, and thank you, Festival of Bharat. Very best of luck to all of you. And thank you, audience.
Thank you so much, Abhinavji. And to our audience, I would like to request, please continue to support us and do subscribe to both our channels, the Festival of Bharat and Citti Media. And do share our videos, and we'll be back with another thought-provoking and fascinating conversation like today. But until then, take care and namaste.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.